Hello, everybody. My name is Mara Menzies, and I'm delighted to welcome you to From Page to Stage, which is a strand of the Paisley Book Festival that I guest curated this year. And before I introduce you to the wonders that are Hannah Lavery and Dean Atta, I'd just like to say a few words about the Paisley Book Festival, which is now in its third year. It's part of the Future Paisley Development, which is a series of events and activities and investment that really draw on the rich and internationally significant cultural story of Paisley. And this has the potential to really transform the future of Paisley. Now, this year's festival is a little bit different to last year's. Last year's was a completely digital festival, but this year we are delighted that it is a hybrid festival. 2022 is Scotland's Year of Stories, and the theme this year for the festival is Stories Marcus, which is a wonderful way to explore the transformational power of stories. And we're doing this through a mixture of live events in Paisley, but also some will be live streamed digitally on our YouTube channel, and all the digital content is free to access. And if you access it and you love it and you wish to support the festival, then you can do so at paisleybookfest.com/support. You can also spread the word. Social media is our friend. Our Twitter handle is Book Paisley and our Instagram handle is Paisley Bookfest. And if you use the hashtag PBF2022, then everybody will know what you're up to, where you're up to, who you're listening to, what incredible ideas you're sharing, and they too will be able to join in the conversation. But back to this event tonight. So we are absolutely thrilled to have the award-winning poet, performer and playwright Hannah Lavery. Her book Blood Salt Spring has been published last year, and it is now a collaboration between the National Theatre of Scotland and the Push Out the Boat Festival. So it is touring, which is incredibly exciting, and I'm sure that Hannah, who is also the Edinburgh Macker, is going to be telling us a little bit more about that too. Very exciting. Also, absolutely delighted to have the award-winning author Dean Atta, who is not only an incredible author, but just an all-round wonderful human being too. So to have these two on stage talking about their processes, talking about their work, is a real dream come true for me. One of the things that I really wanted to explore with this particular strand was the transition from performance storytelling, telling stories orally, and then transitioning to telling stories in the literary form. Because when you have an audience in front of you, there is a very different relationship to having a silent audience, a readership who are taking in your words and exclusively words, as opposed to being able to tell the story with your physicality and your facial expressions and the tone of your voice. So I was really interested to explore the way that we tell stories, how we embody all of these thoughts and processes in the words that we either perform or the words that we write down, and how these can be transformed and shared with audiences wherever we might go. So sit back, enjoy, engage, be inspired, entertained, and hopefully at the end of this, you too might also find yourself a little bit transformed. Enjoy.
Brilliant. So in case you didn't hear, at the beginning of the video, that's Mara Menzies, and she curated this event by putting myself and Hannah together. But we knew each other already, so
Yes,
when we got asked to do it together, we were like, yes, please. So I'm really excited to be having this conversation with Hannah, and that Mara has introduced us so beautifully. And to be back at Paisley. I was at Paisley Book Festival 2 years ago, talking about my book, The Black Flamingo. So now I'm glad I get to talk with someone else, and we can talk about how we work and how we create work and perform our work, and it's going to be really lovely. And we're going to have an opportunity for questions towards the end of this session, so do have some questions for us, please. But if you don't, we'll just keep asking each other questions. We've got lots to talk about, and lots to catch up on, because we haven't seen each other in person for over like a year and a half. Well, saw you in Edinburgh for like 5 minutes.
That's true. That's true.
In passing at another festival. But it's so nice to be here and be here together, Hannah.
Yeah, it's lovely.
So we're going to start by doing some readings each. And Hannah's asked me to go first, which I've obliged to do. Because actually I prefer to go first because I'm most nervous until I've read some poems. Like, I'm fine talking, but I think I'm better reading my poems. So I'm going to do that. You ready for that?
Yep.
Yay! So these poems are coming out of The Black Flamingo, which is my novel in verse. And I published this in 2019. And it's been a real pleasure to have in the world because it's a kind of fairy tale version of my life, my childhood. I kind of took some of the best bits and made up some bits as well to make a beautiful kind of coming of age story for a black gay boy growing up in London and who goes on to come out as gay and do drag performance as well. And this book kind of celebrates him in all of those things and also the friends and family that support him to be who he is. And this was inspired by a true sighting of a black flamingo when I was visiting my family in Cyprus. So my family are from Cyprus and Jamaica. I visit them fairly often. And I was visiting family in Cyprus and there was a real black flamingo. So this moment is actually the first part of the book I wrote. And originally I thought it was just a standalone poem. And then as I spent more time with it, and the whole theme of a black flamingo, so standing out from the crowd, being the black one in a sea of pink, and kind of being fabulous and being talked about, was kind of something that I really wanted to explore. And through exploring that theme, I found him doing drag performance was a cool way of expressing that individuality. So this is kind of a mix between real life and storytelling because, you know, this really happened, but then I put it into a fictional tale. And we can talk a bit more about that later. And this is the sighting of the black flamingo. So the main character here, Michael, is 16 years old and he's with his Cypriot grandfather in Cyprus. Grandad goes back inside. He draws my attention to the news. The story, a black flamingo has landed on the island. An expert on screen explaining it is the opposite of an albino. Too much melanin, he says. Camera pans the salt lake full of pink, but my eye is drawn to that one black body in the flamboyance. The following evening, my beach towel and shorts dry on the balcony. Couples on mopeds ride past the house. Dogs walk humans before dinner. Grandad coughs violently, then lights another cigarette. Grandma calls us in to eat. The black flamingo is on the news again. I pick the dining chair facing the TV. Grandad asks, why does it matter if he's black? Adding, the other flamingos don't care. And I am certain what he's saying is I love you. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first piece I wrote. And then I was kind of going backwards and forwards in kind of my own life and thinking about, okay, other important moments where I kind of felt supported or loved or was like pivotal to understanding my identity. And kind of that's kind of what this book does, but through a fictional character, a version of myself that I can kind of take liberties with the truth and kind of take poetic license basically to tell this story. But Michael, the character, reflects on his identity in narration, but also in kind of like notebook poems. So there's pieces that are like reflections on who he is and where he comes from and what makes him the person that he is. So this is one of them. And he, in the book, performs this at an open mic night. But you'll be the open mic night because it's actually an open mic in a students' union. So this is perfect. So I come from shepherd's pie and Sunday roast, jerk chicken and stuffed vine leaves. I come from traveling through my taste buds but loving where I live. I come from a home that some would call broken. I come from DIY that never got done. I come from waiting by the phone for him to call. I come from waving the white flag to loneliness. I come from the rainbow flag and the Union Jack. I come from a British passport and an ever-ready suitcase. I come from jet fuel and fresh coconut water. I come from crossing oceans to find myself. I come from deep issues and shallow solutions. I come from a limited vocabulary, but an unrestricted imagination. I come from a decent education and a marvelous mother. I come from being given permission to dream, but choosing to wake up instead. I come from wherever I lay my head. I come from unanswered questions and unread books, unnoticed effort and undelivered apologies and thanks. I come from who I trust and who I have left. I come from last year, and I don't notice how I've changed. I come from looking in the mirror and looking online to find myself. I come from stories, myths, legends, and folk tales. I come from lullabies and pop songs, hip-hop and poetry. I come from griots, grandmothers and her storytellers. I come from published words and strangers' smiles. I come from my own pen, but I see people torn apart like paper, each a story or a poem that never made it into a book. And I'll do one more piece from the Black Flamingo. Thank you. Hannah whispered it's beautiful. It's made me feel very good. And this next piece is a piece that I wrote kind of almost thinking back to my younger self. So I kind of came out as gay when I was 15, when I was at school. But when I was at school, it was, I guess, a different time. We still had Section 28, which meant schools couldn't be seen to promote homosexuality. You couldn't have like LGBT-themed books. You couldn't talk positively about same-sex relationships. And it was, teachers couldn't come out to their students. And all of that was a real weight on a whole generation or more than a generation of people, because not only the students, the teachers at that time were having to do that as well. Whether or not they agreed with it, must have been such a weight on everyone to be so restricted. That not being in place anymore. For example, yesterday I was in 2 different schools in Paisley doing readings, and there were rainbow flags everywhere. There were LGBT groups that meet regularly at the schools. The librarians had displays of LGBT books, and it was just so beautiful and so different to what it was like when I was at school. But also, young people came to speak to me after the readings and the Q&As I did in the schools and said, I'm not sure when to come out as gay, or trans or bi. Are my parents gonna, how they're gonna react? Like, some of my friends know, but I don't want everyone to know. And I was like, there's no rush. Just because, it's okay to be gay and trans and there's rainbow flags, and it doesn't mean you have to rush to come out. You can take your time. And I think that's a message that we don't always tell kids. Like, just tell people come out as soon as you can. I think you can actually take your time with it, and that's something I actually advocate for. I'm a patron of LGBT plus History Month, and I really support all the work that we do in that month and all year round. But I also think that no one should feel they have to come out if they're not ready to. And also, I feel like identity shifts, and so you might come out as one thing and then later on change your mind. And so this poem is kind of reflecting on some of those themes, and I say it better in the poem than that ramble, but this is called How to Come Out as Gay. Don't come out unless you want to. Don't come out for anyone else's sake. Don't come out because you think society expects you to. Come out for yourself. Come out to yourself. Shout, sing it, softly stutter. Correct those who say they knew before you did. That's not how sexuality works. It's yours to define. Being effeminate doesn't make you gay. Being sensitive doesn't make you gay. Being gay makes you gay. Be a bit gay. Be very gay. Be the glitter that shows up in unexpected places. Be typing on WhatsApp, but leave them waiting. Throw a party for yourself, but don't invite anyone else. Invite everyone to your party, but show up late or not at all. If you're unhappy in the closet but afraid of what's outside, leave the door ajar and call out. If you're happy in the closet for the time being, play dress up until you find the right outfit. Don't worry, it's okay to say you're gay and later exchange it for something else that suits you, fits, feels better. Watch movies that make it seem a little less scary. Beautiful Thing, Moonlight. Be Southeast London Council Estate, a daytime dance floor, his head resting on your shoulder. Be South Beach, Miami, night of water and fire, your head resting on his shoulder. Be the fabric of his shirt, the muscles in his shoulder, your shoulder. Be the bricks, be the sand, be the river, be the ocean. Remember, your life is not a movie. Accept you'll be coming out for your whole life. Accept advice from people and sources you trust. If your mother warns you about HIV within minutes of you coming out, try to understand that she loves you and is afraid. If you come out at 15, this is not a badge of honor. It doesn't matter what age you come out. Be a beautiful thing. Be the moonlight too. Remember, you have the right to be proud. Remember, you have the right to be you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to hand over to Hannah, and I just want to say, it's a real pleasure to share the stage with Hannah. And I moved to Scotland in 2019, just after the book came out, and I was really seeking community and people that I could relate to, other writers and writers of colour in particular. And Hannah was running a wonderful group at the Scottish Poetry Library at the time, and coming along to that, immediately I kind of felt like I found my tribe, and I didn't feel lonely in Scotland. I immediately had people I could connect with, both in person and online, when the group moved online, and it was definitely something that kind of gave me a sense of still being with community, even when I was just in my flat. When we couldn't be mixing, I was going on these Zoom calls and being led by Hannah through writing exercises and seeing smiling faces, sometimes crying together, and going through it all, but together. And it was it's been such a brilliant kind of constant through this time of me being here, even though so much has changed. Hannah's groups have been there, and the groups that kind of have formed around everything that's been going on with that has been brilliant. So I know Hannah is just an incredible poet, but also someone who kind of fosters so much community around her. So I want to hand over to not just Edinburgh Macca, the Macca of my heart, Hannah Lavery.
Oh, wow. I feel a bit overcome. What a beautiful reading that was too. I remember reading Black Flamingo, and I gave it to my son to read, and he read it 5 times.
Wow.
And it's such a beautiful, I think you give the gift of such invitation in your work. You invite people in, and that's such an incredible gift, I think, for a writer to do. And so thank you so much, and I'm going to try my best to follow. Isn't it odd being in a room full of actual people? I think I'm a bit overwhelmed by that too, so apologies if I'm generally just overwhelmed. And with that, I don't know where to put this. So I'm going to read you some poems. Thank you. I'm going to read you some poems from my new collection, my debut collection. So I'm very excited. It's the first time I've seen it properly. And it's called Blood, Salt, Spring. And I started writing this, there's poems in here that have been with me a long time, and there's poems that have been written over the last, feels like a decade since, you know what I mean? I don't know, how long has it been since we've been all kind of locked down and kind of forced to reflect on so much. I think especially as a writer of colour, I think of anyone actually of colour, it's been particularly these last 2 years have not only been about the experience of lockdown, the experience of worrying about your health and your family and your income and everything else, but just that there's so many conversations that sprung up around the kind of Black Lives Matter I think sometimes were inviting us to relive trauma and relive moments, and that almost felt like one way we were given space to share those stories and discover the connections that we may have had with each other and create that community, but it also felt sometimes that we were being asked to share stuff about ourselves or be spoken about in a way without any agency around that. So this book probably is a bit of that. It's a bit of a journal, really, of the last 2 years, and it's split into 3 sections because it's also a journey to spring. I think it's a journey for me claiming my own kind of individuality or my own sense of my own uniqueness, when it felt like the last couple of years have been asked us to be sort of representative, which can be limiting, I think. So I'm going to start with a poem called Backwards, and it's an amazing moment. I was reading a lot of people's accounts of growing up black and brown in Britain, and one of the things I discovered that a lot of people talked about would be putting remedial English. And it really struck me because I felt that was quite a unique experience. When I was in primary school in Edinburgh, you know, in the kind of, let's say, the 80s. Well, it was the 80s. It wasn't another. It was then. I was kind of marched. I'm not sure. You know, memory's a funny thing. I feel like I was marched down, but I was in a remedial English group where everyone in the group was brown, and it was not really. There was no test. It was just like we were put in this group, and I was a really good reader, so it was a really. So anyway, this is about that. It's called Backwards. She corrals us brown kids into remedial, muted in our mothers' tongues, though here it's only my father they see. Months pass as Miss attempts to convince me that a D is made up of a bouncing ball and a bat. 2 B's make 1 D. A bouncing ball, is that not 3? Oh, I see. This is where I lose my faith. My mother fights for me, screams, I don't belong, her mother tongue. She reads Anne of Green Gables. I do. Not that it matters, or maybe it does, when in the playground with knees scuffed from falling. It matters not a jot, channeling Anne, for I'm on a pony and trap with Matthew, travelling the white way of delights, passing by the lake of shining waters, and those are not school railings, but the wild wood, and those are not spitting lads with sweaty cocks, but wild boar or Nazi soldiers running down the line, and I am not a girl. I am sea mist, the morning har, poison gas, floating between, dancing upon, bouncing my ball, swinging my fucking bats. So this is the next poem I'm going to read, it's fragments, so it's 6 sections, 6 fragments, and I was asked to, 2021, I was commissioned by the Royal Society of Edinburgh and the National Theatre of Scotland to create a piece of work that was reflecting on, bizarrely, this was May 2021. There was optimism that was about writing a piece of work about what we're going to do after COVID, forgetting that we had another lot to go. So it was a sort of post-COVID piece before COVID was post or done with us. But it was asking me to look at COVID from a female perspective. And if we remember 2021, it was a particularly tough time for women. There was Sarah Everard. We had our First Minister that was kind of grilled in front of the committee room, and all of those conversations that were happening around that time about maybe our return to the streets and our return to the cities, and what that would be, and what we were going to put up with, and what we weren't anymore. So I wrote a piece called 13 Fragments, and it was made into a really beautiful film poem that was the wonderful Beth Chalmers helped make the film. Nat McCleary performed in it, and my great and very misloved friend Beldina of the NO did the music, the soundtrack for it. So this is not all 13 fragments. In the book I've just put 6 of them in, but I've called this Fragments 2021. But I suppose it really speaks to 2020 as well, and maybe it speaks for beyond that too. 1. We took what we were given and spun a web for them to catch us in, wore it like a crown, dressed in it like it was gold, like it was silk, and not a trap. 2. And we didn't go out and protest because our children were restless and our mothers were failing and our work was calling and our bills needed paying, but we took to the night. for just a moment to breathe before turning back and walking home. She was just walking home. 3, I'm done. I'm not switching on. I'm not turning up. I'm not tuning in. I'm not holding on to your bloody hand. Not today. I'm not going to rise up. I'm not going to stand up and fist up and kneel down. I'm not taking this on. I'm not fighting your opinions. Not today. I'm not coming in. I'm drop weights. I'm pit bound. I'm leveling down. Each level down. He took us whilst we slept, whilst we walked, I'm in the pit, buried neck deep. I'm with the devil today. When you called, pal, I was here. Nailed to the cross, mates, building a pyre, mates, collecting all the fire, mates, winding rope to the trees. Mother, I'm not going out today. I'm not coming over. I'm swinging with all the dead girls. I'm not getting up. I'm pulled in, drawn, drapes down, drawn, crepe gown drawn, clown face drawn, corpse bride. I'm drowning in pulled sheets, holding off bedlam, marked beldam. I'm not going, not today. I'm down in the mud swamp. I'm sleeping in dark pit. I'm sleeping in bright flash light. I'm drowning in pulled sheets. 4. She stands for another year in a chamber of echoes, prepared to list the dead they cut to an old man in a hall of mirrors before she even finishes saying their names. 5. In a dream, my grandmother appeared. Gold bangles, red silk, lily of the valley. She handed me rosemary. I took it. I took her hand, my inheritance, handed down in larch box. Find your coven, she whispered. 6. If we were real, we'd be as tall as statues, as permanent as a street name, as strong as a building named after our sister, built for our sisters to speak. Monuments would rise to meet the birds, our ghost women. The next poem is dedicated to my friend Baldina, and it is called, we can find it here. It's called Leaves Fall Gold for Baldina. There is something divine in endings. When God comes to sit with you, leaves fall, gold on the ground. The day the call came, she is gone. I lay on my bedroom floor like a felled tree, staring up at the irreplaceable. Should we cry it out to the sky? Where should we take it, this pain? I stared at the empty sky. Where did she go? Until it dropped low enough to meet me in the December sun. And as the year closed, a bullfinch came to sit, beautiful orange in the bare winter branch. I lit another candle to light up flat memory, but the sun cut in, leaving my ritual redundant. There is nothing more sacred than the new day. It's how I move forward now that she has become everything. The sky is so beautiful today. I hear her laughter in it. I hear it all the time. I hear her in every line. I'm going to finish now, but I'm going to finish with a poem. So a year ago, I had the great pleasure and honor of being asked to be part of a translation project with a group of Ukrainian poets for the Stanza Poetry Festival, and we were going to present the poems at an event at the festival next month. And I worked with this wonderful poet where we shared our poems, and we got bridge translations, and we kind of translated each other's work. And her name was Olena Hosninova, which I've pronounced wrong. Anyway, so I'm going to read her poem in solidarity for Ukraine, and it's called Trains. Cinema is made for trains that fly forward at full speed, but at the end, when no one but the ones who refuse to close their eyes are left in the cheap seats, something else will appear on the screen. One day, one train won't be able to help itself and will tear through the cloth of silver. It might be a European Express with an exquisite dining chair car, or a suburban train with dirty windows, or a cattle train full of cries. There will be fewer victims than a plane crash, and they'll talk about it, but only briefly on the news. The union of cinematographers will take it upon themselves to care for the families of the dead. Free tickets to premieres guaranteed. No cinema will close. There will be the lucky ones who will treasure the broken glass, the torn cloth. I am waiting outside. By the poster of this film, will you make sure, absolutely make sure, that in this film there won't be any more trains? Thank you very much. Well, this is lovely.
Yeah.
So we have some wonderful questions that Mara sort of offered to us to kind of start our conversation between each other. And I think this was kind of struck me as quite interesting about the question that she put first for us to speak about was, are you a writer first and a performer second? And what was that journey? So I'm offering that to you. How would you answer that?
I was definitely a performer first. So when I was a kid, I did lots of performances, not just like school plays. I was also like going to theatre school on the weekend. And so I did some musical theatre in the West End. I was in a choir. I was on Songs of Praise twice like, with the choir I was in, which was pretty cool. I was in Oliver in the West End, and I did, lots of bits and pieces. So I loved being on stage. Performing was like my favourite thing, basically. At every talent show they had at school, I'd do it, and people would stop me in the playground and say, "Dean, sing something for me." It was like my thing that kind of protected me. It was like my protective bubble that I was the entertainer, and I think that got me through school feeling like, I had something special about me, and that was definitely primary school. And then in the beginning of secondary school, I did that, but then I started to kind of lose my luster for it, I don't know, and I kind of fell into a more reflective mode of being as a teenager. And I think part of that was like my sexuality, knowing I was gay and not being ready to come out, and I started to write about that. I started to get quite sad about not having my dad around, because I was becoming a man and I didn't have a male role model in the house. And so I was like reflecting on that, and I turned to like musicians, like rappers and singers and poets as well. Like I was really into Gil Scott-Heron's poetry. I loved Benjamin Zephaniah. You know, I was listening to Tupac and Biggie, and like kind of just trying to look for messages and some teachings from these like black men that I didn't know, but I felt like they knew something about me, or I would kind of grow to be like them. And so yeah, that was kind of how I started engaging with lyrics and writing. And I'd try and write my own raps, and then like I'd forget what instrumental I'd used for it. So then it was like, oh, it's a poem, I guess. Like that was kind of how I fell into poetry, was like thinking I wanted to be a rapper, but not quite going for it in that regard, and actually then finding poetry was an art form in its own right, and I could embrace that and not kind of do the musical thing, but actually do the kind of words on their own. And so I went to open mics at the age of like 16, 17, and, you know, went by myself and didn't tell friends I was going, and just performed to rooms of strangers, and really loved it. And it was equivalent to the feeling that I got when I was doing theatre when I was younger, but I had written it.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't, you know, someone else's words. These were my words that people were listening to and clapping for, and coming up to me afterwards and saying nice things, or like also saying, you know, my dad wasn't around, and I really appreciate how you articulated that. In like, these were like big people. Like to me, I was like 16, 17, and I had people in their 40s and 50s come up to me crying, saying, I've never resolved my emotions about my dad, but you have put it into words for me. And like, I was just like, wow, adults think I know what I'm talking about. And so that just gave me the momentum to keep going. And by the time I reached 18, I was like, I am a poet. And I was very confident in it. So when I went off to university, I'd introduce myself. I had my big, long dreadlocks, and I was like bouncing around. And that was because I loved Bob Marley and I loved Benjamin Zephaniah, so I grew dreadlocks. And I bounced along. I'm Dean, I'm a poet, like, catch me at the next open mic, like, and that was my personality throughout uni, was like, Dean the poet, but it was always performance poetry. I wasn't thinking about printing my work and like sending it to competitions or putting together a collection or anything like that. And so I was putting my stuff on YouTube and SoundCloud and MySpace back in the day as well. And then it was actually, I met Benjamin Zephaniah. And like, I had a CD of some of my spoken word recordings, and I gave it to him, and he wrote back to me and he said, this is great, like, do a book. And I was like, oh, maybe I should do a book.
Wow.
Like, and so, yeah, he actually was the person that like looked at my first book deal contract, like gave me a quote to go on the front, and just encouraged me. And little did he know, like, I think I must have told him at some point, but like, he was one of my inspirations. Obviously, he's so many people's inspirations, but
Absolutely.
that, you know, him saying you should do a book made me think, I should do a book.
Yeah.
And I did do a book. Yeah, and so I think that was the journey. It was someone telling me I should do it, and I wasn't really thinking about kind of publishing as such. I felt comfortable on stage performing my work, and that was kind of enough for me. And I didn't really know what changed when you had a book. You go to all these festivals, and schools take you more seriously as an author, and you can do more like school visits and stuff like that. And it just kind of changed the dynamic of how I related to my writing and what its place was in the world, really. So I was definitely a performer first, but once I published, I think having that performance background makes me feel more comfortable in these spaces and such. So what was it for you?
I think it's something similar in the sense that it began with open mics for me, but I've always, I do, it's interesting to say that thing about community, because I think for me, there was something really powerful about performing a poem and actually seeing that response to me, like knowing that you're connecting with people and then having those sort of conversations that came off the back of it. And I found that was, I just thought that was really life-changing, and it gave me a sort of a sense that what I was doing had some sort of purpose to it. And I definitely think there was something about that. There was something about the connection that was being made, and the feeling that you were sharing the stage with other people, and that there was other, there'd be someone in the audience that would come up and share their poem, and it'd be like this wonderful, and I loved that, and I think I loved that sort of scene. But of course, that I didn't find that till much later. So I didn't really, I think when I was younger, there wasn't really the kind of open mic scene around, kind of. So I didn't really find that till I was in my 30s. So before that, writing for me was just it's always just something I've done. I've never quite thought of it beyond just something that I do, in a sense. And I've always loved poetry, and I've always loved reading, and I've always loved theatre. So, but they felt, in a way, I suppose they felt separate things. And then actually, I suppose it was also because I didn't really know what I did with these poems. I'd write this work, and I don't really know how I didn't really know how people got poetry books. I didn't know, like, you'd read them, but I wonder how that happens. But I thought, but if I go there, I can just do it straight away, so I don't have to wait for whatever happens that you get this thing. So I literally I didn't know there was such thing as poetry magazines. I had no idea what to do. So I just thought, I can go here and I can write this poem, and I can go there and I can perform it, and I can make a connection with someone, and someone will, will have that thing of sharing your work with someone, which is really powerful. And and again, like yourself, then people started asking me to perform more of them, and then it was a sense of someone going, I really would like that poem. And I remember just one time just writing it down on a bit of paper for someone and going, there you go. Or even handing like my printout and going, oh. In fact, once I sold a printout of my poems. Someone just said, how much do you want for it? And my friend went, that's 40 quid. I was like, 40 pounds. And they were like, and I remember running around going, I got 40 quid just for some things I printed out. And, and I imagine they were behind, I still now have a nightmare that they were behind me going, well, she never could have taken a fiver. But yeah, so I think it was like that thing of going, oh, well, people want this. But they were always, I suppose they always existed on the page for me, so it wasn't like I was going, oh, now I have to put them on the page. They were always on the page before I kind of performed them in a way. But the poetry I've loved, the poetry that's always inspired me, like yourself, it's been, I loved sort of hip hop, I love songwriters, and I love poetry where the poetry when you see it in the book and you're almost compelled to say it out loud in your own, like you just can't help but read it out loud. That's the stuff, like, and I remember like watching Maya Angelou when I was younger and just thinking, it was her voice and the way and that was so powerful to me. And then I remember hearing Liz Lockhead, and so it was always for me that I felt that was the poetry I fell in love with, was the stuff that was, that you felt you had to read it. You'd get your poetry book and then you would quietly read it out. But that was the stuff that was inspired me. So it's a weird thing for me to think they're separate. I mean, now, of course, I know much more about poetry, and I know that some poetry is never supposed to leave the page. That's where it exists. But for me, it was like the poetry that grabbed me and held me was the stuff that I felt the voice, or I heard the voice, or I could feel the rhythm. And so that's, so I don't know if that answers Mara's lovely question.
I think so.
But I think you're always on a journey. I don't feel like I finished what was your journey? I don't know, my journey's still kind of moving around. And
you write not just for yourself and your own voice, you write for actors to perform as well. So how do you do that? Like when I write a novel with different characters, like I have to like say those voices and in their accents and like think about how they speak and where they're coming from and create all this backstory, even if it's like just for me to know. Like, and then, I've written some plays as well, and I kind of feel for a while that all these different voices exist in my head, and sometimes that's overwhelming. Like, do you find it the same when you write plays and for other voices?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a world builder. Like, if I'm writing, at the moment I'm writing a TV script, and like, the amount of, like, I've written pages and pages of the characters, like right down to, and I've got a whole, and it's really hard for me to remember what the story is. I'm like, but I want to talk about, everything that this person's going through. So no, I definitely, I have to sort of, but in some ways it's not different for me when I write poems, because even though a lot of my poetry is autobiographical, I'm old enough now that I've been lots of different people, if that makes sense. So there's always a part of me that's kind of going, oh, what was that? Being 8, like what was that voice and what was that feeling and a lot of, I think it was, I can't remember the person, this is terrible, but that, that line about writing in yesterday's blood, the sense that I'm always writing in yesterday's blood, so I'm always having to kind of find the character in my poetry. So finding the character in writing theatre is not such a big leap, but you're right, I need to find the voice but like with Lament, because it was verbatim, because it was a lament, it was like an epic poem.
Will you tell people what Lament is in case they don't know?
So I wrote a play, or a lyrical play, or I don't know how you define it, called Lament for Shekubayo, about it was a lament for a man called Sheikh Ubaya, who was 31, died in police custody in Fife in 2015. And I wrote an epic poem for him that was ended up being performed by 3 different women, and Baldina was the 4th performer who made the music for that. But in a sense, the characters in that, I described them as being keeners, that kind of professional mourners. I don't know if you know the tradition of keening, but I kind of, in my head, I thought, well, I'm going to have these 3 keeners, and keening was traditionally done by women, so it felt right to have these 3 keeners and 3 lamenters. So in terms of character, the character was essentially, it was almost a one voice or one poem that was shared. So it wasn't like I was in that moment having to create character. I think it was more about creating like moments of emotion, and creating moments like creating the journey of the poem, and then kind of giving that to different voices. So that was a slightly different experience. But yeah, so I can't remember the question. But yeah, characters. I think there's always a character in writing poems too, though. So yeah, I think that might be my answer.
And you managed to find that. So you say you've been many different people, and many poets talk about, the I in the poem isn't always them.
No.
But for most part, it is with me. I don't know for you. Do you find that it's the I is someone else, or is another character?
It is. I mean, it is. Yeah, a lot of times, especially in this collection, it is me, but it's me in different places and times. Some of it, there's a couple of poems there that isn't me at all.
Yeah.
Actually, so there's a poem in there which is I'm imagining being my grandmother and using her voice, and then there's a poem where there's actually quite a few poems that aren't me, and there's poems that are imagining myself into like I've put a situation into it to say something. So I kind of created a narrative that didn't, or a thing that happened that didn't happen in a sense. So, I mean, everything comes from you. Even if I was going to write about, Mickey Mouse and the Moon, which is the next collection, but it would still be me. Do you know what I mean? It'd probably be me, and I'm imagining like some beach that I've been on. I'd be like, that'll be the moon. I know that. It's like, so that it's always you.
Yeah,
it's crazy to say not, but yeah, the eyes, sometimes it's me in different periods of my life. A lot of the time, I did I did a spoken word play, and it became a pamphlet called The Drift, which was about the death of my father. My father died in 2014. It didn't, the play really didn't come out in 2019. So the time I was, the I in that was 5 years ago. And so it wasn't, so it wasn't me then. So so I think there's such a complicated, it's probably not an easy, it's a difficult one to answer in some ways.
And we both write a lot about family, and I was going to ask you this later, but I'll ask you it now, about kind of that responsibility that you have when you're kind of writing about things that have happened in your life, to people in your life, whether it's parents, grandparents, your children. I find I felt incredibly responsible writing about, a character quite similar to my mum, or my granddad, or my sister. And then in my poetry, where it's more explicitly, this is about that ex, and this is about that. Do you know what I mean? People could tell who they were, but also we have, I guess, the right to tell our own part of that story. But what do you feel in kind of the responsibility?
It's so, because sometimes I'm like, well, I'm a writer, so what do you expect? But also, sometimes when I wrote The Drift, I didn't really expect anyone to ever see it.
Okay.
I wrote The Drift and thought I was going to perform it in front of 10 people in the room. I thought, well, I can say what I like because no one's going to come. Suddenly I was doing it with the National Theatre of Scotland. I was like, oh no, I wouldn't have. And actually, my auntie gave me really good permission, and my sisters, because my sisters and my brother have a very different relationship to my dad than I did. And they were just like, well, that was your truth. That's what, you're sounding a bit like Donald Trump, but there was that was my truth, and you have your truth, and we'll ever. So, so there is a sense of going, well, this is how I experience stuff. And I know there's a poem in here that my mum hasn't seen the collection yet, but there's a poem in here called Mum's Things.
Yeah.
And it's there are things, and it was a memory of the thing. It's just a list poem. It's the things that I remember my mum having. And I know when she reads that, she's like, I don't know what you're talking
Fake
about.
news,
She's
fake
like,
news.
that's not right. And like, I've got a poem called My Mum Wears Pink Lipstick. And I know my mum wore pink lipstick, but she's like, I never wore pink lipstick.
Huh.
And I'm like, yes, you did. And like, my stepdad's like, well, it's poetic license, Hannah. And I'm like, no, you actually wore pink lipstick. So, you know, memory is a funny thing. So I don't, I mean, I've written about my children here in this book.
Very tenderly, I should say.
Yeah.
Like, I felt,
Thank you.
You know, I felt like if you were my mother, I'd be like, wow, like what tenderness and love and kind of bravery, because you're not speaking for your child, you're speaking as a mother, but also to other mums and people who kind of turn a blind eye to bad behavior of their kids, you know,
Yeah,
so
well, I mean, there's two poems in particular. I mean, like, the second section, Spring, there's my favourite poem, which is called Poet and Her Son, and it was like based on what my son started telling me about. My son loves maths, and he started talking about prime numbers, and I started being like, oh, prime, well, that's just because you're like yourself. And he goes, well, imagine a chicken. I'm like, oh yeah, she's great. And like, it's like, no, like five groups of words. It was just like, it's a kind of poem about how a poet responds to a mathematical kid. They're like, oh, you know, like, Jenny and John went to buy 3 things. Well, why did Jenny with John? Why was Jenny going? Like, why did she want the 3 oranges? So it's like that sort of poem, and I love that. But there's 2 poems in the salt section of my thing, which were about my son experiencing racism at school and my other son experiencing homophobia. And it was about, I think for me, I put those poems in because what I felt that we're in this period, because one, I feel like my job as a poet, and I don't know, we've talked about this before, I think, but our kind of job is to sort of exercise people's or ask for empathy. We're asking for, and I felt there was a lot of debates that were going on that people were thinking they're being very intellectual, very, you know, and actually not realizing the harm that happens. That when you discuss people, there's harm to that. So when you're discussing, you know, stuff around, for example, all these conversations around trans rights or anything, there's a child that has to go to school. There's a child that's overheard that conversation, and actually, and I was just trying to make a little plea for empathy that these conversations have harm, and this is what happens when we, you know, when you talk about. Someone talks about Black lives and you turn back with All Lives Matter. Well, that's a little child that's in the class who is finding some sort of identity in Black Lives Matter that suddenly gets told that they're somehow part of a cultural war, when actually it was not. You know, so I think those reasons, I felt there was a strong enough reason for me to sort of share those experiences. But I do ask my kids, my kids are old enough now to have read that and say that's okay, and I'm happy for you to do that. But it's difficult, isn't it?
Definitely.
I mean, did you have conversations with your mum about it, or did you just do it and just hope she didn't read it?
I said no. I think I check things that I think, you know, factually or kind of things that I think might be sensitive, but no, I've got license to write what I like. Same with my partner now. I've been writing poems about him, and sometimes I show them to him. He's like, all right. And they're like either like really gushy or they're really like challenging about some of our like difficult times.
But we both made the sensible thing to partner up with people who are not poets.
Not poets at all.
So essentially they're just not, they're just like, oh, that's your job.
They're
that's
just more interested in their camper vans and going hiking.
Yeah, that's it. Like, whatever you've done. Yeah.
I think it's time to open up as well. So please raise your hand, and there's a roving mic if you want to ask a question, but we still have plenty to ask each other if you don't. But raise it high so the mic can come to you. Okay, while we wait.
No questions.
I wanted to ask you then about collaboration, Hannah. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you do Is there a question? Sorry, I can't tell. I can't see. No. Okay. So you
scratching the head.
You collaborate with a lot of people. You know, filmmakers, musicians, actors. Like, what makes a good collaboration for you? I know that every collaboration is different, but what do you know? How do you ensure it goes as well as can be, and how do you know when it's gone well? Like,
well, I think it's about creating. I think you have to be really clear. You know, I think it's always about, with any kind of relationship, it's been very clear about kind of what your intent is and what your need is. And I think when you're collaborating about your work, I think it's about being with people that allow you to be vulnerable and allow you to be kind of insecure about things and to kind of create. And I actually think the most important thing, and waffling. But I think the most important thing is collaborating with people where you allow them to come with their creativity. And I think sometimes you get so this is my poem, this is how I want it to be, or this is, and actually you have to sort of go, I need to make some space for you to come with your kind of, your artistry, and not be too kind of precious, I suppose. And so that's a pretty difficult thing to do, actually, because you have a vision of stuff. It's like, well, actually, if I don't let people come in with their own stuff, it's going to be, I'm not going to. What's the point?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think? 'Cause you've done.
Yeah, I think if it's a collaboration where you're going to be on stage or be in a space together, obviously having lots of time to rehearse and try things out and stuff. But if it's like they're adapting your work, or interpreting your work, I'd say to people, whether they're doing illustrations for my book, or I'm having one of my poems is going to be made into a stop motion animation. The Black Flamingo is going to be turned into like a TV series. Ooh. And so the people working on that, like, I just say, do your thing, and then if you want me to look later, I will. But like, let's not like sit down and you kind of feel weighed down by my expectations. Like, so like, just do it your way, and I'll look at it like, and I'll be like, well done, because
I remember someone saying to me once, like, being a playwright was like, you write a play, and then you give it to the director, and the director gives it to the actors, and the actor gives it to the audience.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like that when you create a piece of art. It's like, soon as my poem or my piece of work is in your hands, I need to let you have your relationship with it, and I need to let it go and be like, well, now I've done my bit. And I think sometimes we get like, and I don't know how you felt when you first did your first poetry pamphlet or collection. Was it like when you handed it to someone, I remember waking up the next day from when they did The Drift, Finding Sea Glass, and I woke up the next day and I went, do you think I could get those back? Do you think, because I feel like I need to go and just speak, like, can I just get that poem back, and like, let me tell you how you're supposed to. And then I have to let that go and go, actually, it doesn't belong to me anymore, that's yours now. And that's how I remember like experiencing art as well. And so I think you're right, there's a collaboration, then there's the like, well, now I'm giving this to you, and it doesn't belong to me anymore, and I need to step back from it.
I loved when I wrote some plays, like just seeing actors bring it to life, because they bring so much to it, and it was just I think being in the rehearsal room was sometimes like intimidating for them to have the writer, and they'd say, what do you mean, what does my character mean when they say this, like, and I'm like, that's for you to interrogate and find out, because I just feel like I think there's a thing, I don't know how you feel this, but it feels like people think that poets know all the things about their poem. But I feel like, what do you mean by that? I don't know. Like, they go, I think you're saying this in this poem, and I go, oh. Wow. Like, because I remember when I've been at university, I was at university a long time ago, but I remember we talked about the death of the author. And I'm like, I'm all for that. I was like, well, it doesn't really matter what they think their poem's about. I've decided it's this, because it's now, and it's like, well, actually, I think we ask too much. And I remember being in the theatre room, an actor's like, do you mean this with this? And I went, oh, I don't know. Maybe I do. Maybe actually what you've said is a much better reason. And it's like, why would you think I know everything? I just wrote it. That's it.
No, I'm up for that. I like that. Yeah. Question, I think.
Yes.
Is that Leslie? Yeah.
Hi, Hannah. I've got so many questions I want to ask you because I've not seen you for so long.
I know, I'm just like, hello.
Hannah facilitated a mother's writing group that I went along to, so I concur with what you were saying about writing community groups, and actually she supported me to get going with the Long COVID Writers Group as well, so thank you for that. When we were writing, things would happen in real life, and you would write about it along with us, and I wondered if anything that you wrote in any of our sessions made it into the book, because there was a couple of poems I'm thinking, I'm sure I heard you talk about that in that session.
Oh, yeah, probably. I'm thinking especially the stuff around kids. Probably, Leslie, there probably is. I mean, I do that a lot, and I learned that from the wonderful Marjorie Lockfey, who does that. Who, the first time I went to one of Marjorie's groups, and you know Marjorie from Open Book, and you would write, and then she would write a poem too and share it, and I just thought, it's such, that idea of community was so lovely, than, being in a group where the poet sits there and you're going, like, do nothing. It's like, I'll write in 7 minutes as well and show you what I've done. So I'm sure there is stuff in there. I missed that group. No, we should, it's lovely to see you. Yeah, I don't know, what would you,
Well, I saw in your collection, you've got a murmuration poem, and like I've written in your workshop a murmuration poem that's going to be in my next collection that comes out in September, and I'm imagining all over like Scottish literature, murmuration poems are going to pop up from different writing groups that you've led.
And that exercise, I sort of adapted from an exercise I got from Jen Hadfield. So we should definitely, I didn't, if she's living, it wasn't exactly what you did. I just used the same video, but I did it a different way. But yeah, no, but we did that one in our group. So yeah, there's loads of poems in there that are from probably the Writers of Colour group as well. Because both of those groups we did through COVID. So yeah, definitely. Writers groups are great. I mean, what do you think about, does writers groups really aid your work?
Yeah, and so I've always kind of been part of writers groups for quite a long time. When I was in London, I was in the Roundhouse Poetry Collective and Keats House Poets Forum, and then I joined Malika's Poetry Kitchen, and even when I moved, I stayed in touch with them on Zoom and doing, and then, you know, I sought out the Writers of Colour group because I love writing with other people. I think you're inspired to come up with new ideas. You can be critiqued and given wonderful, like, generous, loving feedback in a group of people that you actually feel comfortable receiving it from. I think the safe space that gets created in a writers group is really important. If you take it just a workshop you've never been to before and get that feedback, and it can feel too much. And so, but when you're with people that you know, like they just know how to phrase it in a way. So I think if you can find a writers group that you can kind of learn to feel comfortable in, and it might take a while, it doesn't happen overnight. You don't just slot right into a writers group. Sometimes you kind of have to ease your way into it. But I think there's such wonderful spaces if you
and if you can find one, just
make one.
Just make one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that in Dunbar, like the Writing Mums group I made in Dunbar, which has inspired the group that we did together. It's just like, just sometimes you just go and, it seems like there'll always be some pal that you know that writes, and you'll be like, should we just get together and do that? So yeah, don't wait. You know, the best thing I think that I learned about the whole performance poetry open mic thing, the best thing about it, and the thing that I always tell people is what is wonderful about it is there's no gatekeepers. You get to do it yourself. And I think there's something about that sort of kind of punk DIY part of it. It's just like, well, I'm going to get up and do it myself. If I want a writers group, I'm just going to make a writers group. Yeah. And it's like, I think we wait too much for people to give us permission. And then we also wait too much to tell us if we're any good or not. And I think what a writers group can do for you is it can give you your own power to say, yeah, I know that I've done that poem, I know that works, and I know I've got people that I trust that like it and are doing the same thing. And actually that, for me, the people that I take feedback from are the people I know are doing the same. Like I need, you know, like other writers, other people that are doing it, that are putting their heart on the line, I think. Those are the people that you have to listen to. Yeah.
I think we've got to wrap up now.
We've got to wrap up.
Okay, so we'll be around to chat afterwards with anyone.
And then Dean's books are in the book stall.
As are yours.
As is mine. So thank you so much, and just a round of applause to Dean and to me. And to you all. Thank you.